everyone. Welcome to episode 114 of Formidable Opponents, a show that pits three people who have known each other virtually their entire lives in a series of conversations as we argue what is best in a variety of fun, engaging, and critical pop culture topics we all debate about. I'm Randall, and with me as always, Bob and Joseph, and this week's topic is Best 80s Frontman. The 80s, a decade of excess and fun with no shortage of engaging and interesting personalities, especially in the world of music. On previous episodes, we've talked about the platform MTV gave bands in the 80s, but no one in the band benefited more from the pervasive exposure more so than the frontman. In an era of anthems, ballads, rock, and rebellion, a 24-hour music channel gave a face to the voices we love, but even more than that, it gave them a personality. Characters larger than life, larger than anything you saw in pro wrestling, and charisma that surpassed even the biggest of movie stars. This added dimension helped to sell records, merchandise, it inspired style, culture, and what better era to usher in an explosion of expression and cartoonish antics than the 80s. Although these leads did and said many things that did not quite age well, we were granted a more holistic view of who they were, or at least how they were portrayed. Interviews, concert footage, and of course those monumental music videos. It was the opportunity to shape the narrative, control the story, and become the living embodiment of the era spirit. So let us guide you on this neon-lit voyage. We'll be your companions as we traverse the thrilling landscape of the 80s and the history of that era. So cue the guitars, fire up the drum machine, plug in those synthesizers, and just say no to drugs. For this week, Formidable Opponents discusses and debates Best 80s Frontman. With me, as always, are two guys who might as well jump into this podcast. Careful, you're almost 40. Bob and Joseph, how are you guys doing?
It's good to have you here with us tonight, whatever it is that you're listening.
Whenever it is that you're listening, on the way to work. Sucks, tomorrow's Monday.
Yes, we're back on our Sunday schedule, which is great for, I guess you could say, time's sake, but kind of sucks because we know that tomorrow we got to get the work week started. But we're in April. Things are heating up here. And guys, we're talking about the 80s. So I want to ask you guys, musical taste aside, were the 80s the decade of the frontman? Why or why not?
The 90s and early 2000s had just as many, if not more, frontmen that with their own, characteristics out there, in your face presence. No, I think that they're obviously influenced by 80s frontmen and people that we're going to probably talk about today. Some of these people in the 90s and 2000s are in a class of their own. So I would say no.
I agree half with what you said, Joseph. Nobody in 2000s is a great frontman. Shut the fuck up. It's the 90s is 1,000,000%. Yeah, I think the 90s is the year the frontman that we did a show on Best 90s Frontman, and because we felt so strongly about the characters, the lead singers, these individuals that really stood out and stood above and beyond. I know the 70s had a great amount of frontmen too that started it all off. The Robert Plants, the Ozzy Osbournes before his cocaine run in the 80s. I really do think that there's a lot of great frontmen from the 70s and from the 90s specifically. I agree with Joseph. 2000s, I'm just fucking with you. 2000s had a few. I can give you that few, but we're not going to talk about Fred Durst today, Joseph. Sorry.
I was thinking more Jonathan Davis and of course Marilyn Manson and things like that. But I mean, like I said, a whole other group of people.
So I think as far as the 80s go, I think the innovation of new music mediums certainly helped. These were the best promotional tools because now your song is linked to your look, and that's why MTV comes into play. I think we had a lot of diverse musical taste. There was something for everyone. And there are these cultural icons, and we were talking about this earlier about there's a Michael Jackson biopic in the works, which will be directed by Antoine Fuqua. Just found out recently that Jeremy Allen White is about to do a movie about Bruce Springsteen. So this era is coming a lot to the nostalgic palette of the entire world, where everybody wants to see the backstories. Let's hope they don't do a John Cougar Mellencamp one. I think we could do without that one. But every young...
without the Cougar.
We have a lot of young actors portraying these icons and visionaries. And that just harkens back to the importance of the era and the decade. So let me ask you guys this. What are some of the attributes for a good frontman from this era specifically that stick out to you?
Above all, I'd say stage presence and being the focal point. That's the number one of them all. True, you got to be able to sing, but You know, if you're commanding the audience's attention up there, then I mean, look is part of it. I wouldn't say it's, you know,
The big part, yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, it could be to some. I don't think the look
In the 80s, I think is a huge part of their gimmick, I guess, or their look. Yeah,
the fashion of it. But I mean, you had to be larger than
David
life.
Bowie.
I think that's the main thing to me. I'd say so.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with the stage presence, man. That all day, every day, it's stage presence in the 80s. I do think, though, they all had a specific look. If you go look at 80s fashion and 80s, you know, icons, quote unquote, everybody had a look. Everybody dressed, I mean, out there or different to make them stand out. I mean, look at guys like Prince, like David Bowie. Well, not Bruce Springsteen. He just dressed like he woke up, you know, and put on the first dirty shirt he found. But you have to have this look. You have to have a specific sound. You have to be able to put on a show. You'd have to have that presence, like Joseph said, that stage presence. If you didn't, if you were just like everybody else, I think you'd fall pretty short.
Everything was about personality and being flamboyant in the 80s. Case in point, guys. Chicago Bears, the 85 Bears, the 84 Bears, was it 85 Bears? I'm sorry.
Chicago
Bears. Ditka.
Led by Jim McMahon. Jim McMahon wasn't a great quarterback. He was average. He was okay, but everything about him was about style, about fashion. So therefore, he got the promotion. He was always on TV. If you ask any kid, name a famous quarterback, he was one of the first three named, even though he wasn't one of the top three quarterbacks of the decade. Also, professional wrestling, guys like the Ultimate Warrior, who couldn't really wrestle, but he looked the part. So that was this entire era, right? Personality, flamboyancy. It helps to sing well, not a definite qualification, as we'll talk about later, but it does help. You didn't have to be extremely good looking. You just had to be bigger than life. And I just think that the 80s was an important era in just showing off who you were because of the television medium, because of MTV. Everybody was looking at you more than they were listening to you, or as much as.
Exactly.
A lot of ass. Oh, much as. Sorry.
Can you discuss the influence of 80s frontmen on contemporary music and the ongoing legacy they left behind?
No.
I exactly was about to say the same. It's not because
they didn't fucking. Okay, let me just say this: they didn't fucking leave a legacy because in the 90s it was a complete shift and change in the frontman. Like they're like, yeah, we're tired of your fucking flamboyant bullshit. We're us. They're more introverted. They were the exact polar opposites of the frontmen from the 80s. So I don't know if they left their mark. They may have left their mark on TikTok fuckers that are out and about now because it's all about me. That, you know, it's kind of like, look at me in the 80s. We kind of went back to that, jumped back on that ship. So I don't know if they made this grand mark on music as far as being a frontman is concerned, because the 90s had better frontmen and it was completely different.
I said no, the same thing myself, and I hopefully you have an answer to this, Rand, because that'd be great to hear. But I said no because I can't compare, you know, anybody in today's quote unquote, you know, contemporary music that kind of sound like they have any influence from the people that we're going to talk about or mention. Do you think that they do that?
I look at a lot of popular musicians nowadays. And it seems like musicians like Post Malone, Jelly Roll, these guys, they're not about the flamboyancy. They're about, like, we look like regular people with shitload of tattoos on their face. But
you picked the wrong two examples for regular people there, man.
They're very different. I mean, the stylized versions of what the musical frontman used to be are extinct. It's all about what you make it in terms of how you came up, how you look. And I think 80s influence I think the 80s has an influence on certain singers, but I don't think it's culminated into, like, the music is coming back. Therefore, the style has to come back. I think back then they were the point guards. They were the quarterbacks. The frontmen were of their band. And like a good quarterback or point guard, everyone judges.
State Farm is there.
Thank you, Joseph.
They're not paying us. Okay,
not yet.
All right. Everyone judges the band on how you
State
look.
Farm at least 10 times today. We got to get that money.
So when you're the frontman, everyone judges the band on how you look, act, or perform. We had this very discussion last week about Scott Stapp. On our Creed episode, he dominated because the influence and style of the band goes as far as your lead singer. I think this era elevated that. It put the frontman on a pedestal, and their profiles became the personality of the band, much like you see today. So I agree and I disagree. I agree that was this the biggest era for the frontman? No, but it also was the biggest era of the definition for the frontman on what we see today. So therefore, I think the 80s had a huge influence on a lot of people fronting their bands today, or a lot of frontmen today.
I can agree with that, because when we do
Today's
this,
music sucks. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Well, it kind of does. A lot of it. Like when we do this again, because this is the 80s, right? So we're more than likely going to do another generation. We've done the 90s. When we do the 70s, we won't speak about the 70s frontmen in the way that I don't think, I'm more than sure, we're not going to speak about 70s artists in kind of the way that we're going to talk about the people that we're going to get into. It's going to be a completely different style. I think more 70s as music. Sure, there was, the musicians are the musicians and we know who they are, but I don't give a fuck what Ozzy was wearing, or he could just stand there. He just, I don't want to get too much into this because we're going to, probably just do another episode later, but I mean, Ozzy just stood there and sang. I mean,
no, he pumped his fist and clapped his hands.
A little, but he wasn't
people
like,
for drugs.
He wasn't like the people we're going to discuss, so it's completely different.
He was crazier.
MTV. It was the MTV thing that, like, these people are front and center. So yeah, I agree. Like, this is the decade that, like, I don't know, birthed the quote unquote image of, like, the front man, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, I think that was well put. Let's go on to our honorable mentions. Joseph, who do you got for us?
I got Dee Snider. I got Rob Halford. I got Vince Neil. 80s Vince Neil was on another level. That
Sexy.
guy could do no wrong in the 80s. Like, I'm just saying. Like,
and he wanted to beat the shit out of Axl Rose, so I was on his side.
He's a meme today, but 80s Vince Neil was like on top. And anyway, so I like I mentioned him earlier, David Coverdale of Whitesnake, Sebastian Bach, Bruce Dickinson. I'm gonna mention, of course, I'm gonna mention Prince. I know it's a solo musician, and that might come into play later, maybe. But I mean, how could you not mention him? He was up there. He was a legend.
I agree with the Vince Neil thing. Vince Neil, I have Freddie Mercury since we brought him up. I bigger fan of his 70s music than his 80s. Robert fucking Palmer, dude, the man, Joseph. We've talked about him. He's a great front man, very underrated. Robert
love his
Palmer.
Band.
Yeah. Addicted to Love. Bruce Springsteen, of course. George Michael. I'm surprised you didn't mention. This guy didn't like George Michael. Boo this guy. We've got to mention Bowie, man, just because I love Bowie. What do you got, Rand?
I know we're all unanimous in thinking Michael Jackson. However, Joseph, I think you brought up a great point. We're kind of in this, do we mention them if they were just a singles artist like a David Bowie? Yeah, that's fine. But I think, without saying Michael Jackson in this era, when it comes to somebody that was up front and center, that dominated the decade, that would be unfair not to say. I had Bono. This was pre-Righteous Bono, before he went all black goth and wanted to save the planet. I had John Bon Jovi, Simon Le Bon from Duran Duran, Tom Petty, Freddie Mercury. If we combined 70s and 80s, I probably would have gone with Freddie Mercury for my selection. Steve Perry, Steven Tyler. I also had Vince Neil, Peter Cetera. I had Phil Collins, Paul Westerberg from The Replacements, Bruce Springsteen, David Byrne from Talking Heads. I had Michael Hutchence from NXS, Robert Smith from The Cure, before he discovered ice cream, and Prince, of course. And I know we're not talking about front women for this episode, but there are a few powerhouses who shined, and I can't wait to do that episode. Bonnie Tyler, you're on our minds because we just had an eclipse, but we'll have that 80s.
Of the heart.
And fucking Wilson.
Yeah, Ann Wilson, both Wilson sisters.
Annie Lennox, hello.
Yes. Cyndi Lauper was fantastic too. We talked about how underrated she was.
That's another episode.
Blondie.
We're going to talk about
Blondie.
the 80s again, except the 80s ladies.
Yes,
80s ladies. I like
yes.
that.
Yeah, there you go.
So you know who else like 80s ladies? David Lee Roth.
There you go. And speaking of our selections, Joseph, why don't you kick us off? Who'd you pick for best frontman of the 80s?
I picked Billy Idol. Billy Idol is definitely worthy of recognition for a topic, such as this. He was an extremely talented musician. If you don't know anything about him, just some quick things that you should. I mean, obviously you probably do. He got to start as a guitarist for an English punk band named Chelsea in the 70s. He later left that not too long after and started his own punk band, Generation X. I recommend you check out songs like Kiss Me Deadly, Your Generation, Wild Youth, even their original version of Dancing with Myself, which is basically the same thing because he ended up re-releasing it for his solo stuff.
Why wouldn't anyone dance with him?
I think that was a euphemism, but go ahead.
Yeah. I watched live performances from the 80s, MTV on YouTube to try and, to put his character into words. And although a solo artist by name, I mentioned, and how we kind of talked about, can we talk about these people when they're the solo, or the name, the name of the band? The band is, it's Billy Idol, but it's his band, and whatever. He's definitely up there though with this unique style, this with his unique style of clothing too. His punk aesthetic, mixed with 80s pop culture inspired clothing combined to make it his own. He had charisma. He sings to you, the audience member, excuse me, whether he's looking at the camera or women in the crowd. I saw a lot of clips of women looking up at him like wide-eyed, because he's right in their face, singing to them, like they're ready to have his children. And I know we
wear leather. Yeah.
I know we talk about dancing a lot on this show, and let me tell you, this guy on stage, his dancing, he's miles ahead of Bowie and Jagger. Let me just say
that. Fuck yes.
Oh my gosh.
I agree with that 1,000,000%. Dancing with himself for long.
Speaking of two artists of the same generation, but both sort of similar in their vibe, and how they perform to people. I watched these live performances, and I saw similarities in Billy Idol and Bowie, and I was like, that's really cool. Obviously different musical styles and tastes, but still really, really, really awesome. Billy Idol definitely commands your attention. You feel his presence when he walks in the room, or when he walks on stage. Maybe it's because you hear all the the leather creaking and cracking, but
that's his skin.
Those are his bones now. He's old, man.
I'm gonna get to that. And you're drawn to him. You look at these performances. He's very animated. Whether he's fist pumping, it's an obvious characteristic trait. It's what he's probably known for the most, or jumping up and down, or hip thrusting. He's all over the place. He's very engaged with his audience. He's a definite performer and showman, and I think that's why I selected him. It's easy to see these things and appreciate his performances. From back then, and above all, like we mentioned in the beginning, his voice. I'm a big fan of his voice. It's a rocker. It's punk. It's grimy. It's sort of vampire gothic. It's romantic. When in the ballads, like, excuse me, I had to burp. Eyes Without a Face. Leave that in. The one thing a frontman should have, like we mentioned, other than stage presence, is
sex
a voice and sex appeal. He has that too. And Billy Idol has a great voice. He still has a great voice to this day. You can go and check out some YouTube clips of him performing live on Sirius XM. There was a great one of him doing Rebel Yell. He still sounds great to this day, and I think that's really awesome. Of course, he's older. He's still doing his thing. He's got his style. He's still wearing, the black, the leather, the metal studded jackets and things like that. He's still Billy Idol, and I think that's really fucking cool. What do you guys think?
Billy Idol first achieved fame, you're right, Joseph, in the London punk rock scene as a lead singer of a group called Generation X. No, not Triple H and Shawn Michaels. Generation X from the 70s.
Are you ready?
Whom he formed with guitarist Tony Jones in 1976. Great year. Before I talk about Billy Idol, I have to mention something about the genre he represented. Billy represented punk in a very well-marketed way where, for the most part, punk fans didn't give him a lot of grief about becoming a mainstream rock star. And I want to talk a little bit about Green Day, something a little more modern. No doubt a more successful act. They had their punk roots, just like Billy Idol. What Green Day did was they became one of the biggest rock bands and sort of alienated themselves away from some of their fans and some of their punk roots as well. I am not saying that's wrong. It's a business. There's fame and fortune to be made. Green Day wanted to buy houses, cars, and they wanted to put their kids in private schools where they can be separate from the kids who listen to their music. They did nothing wrong. A lot of punk bands crossed over in the mainstream. The Clash, they did Rock the Casbah, Should I Stay or Should I Go? The Ramones did Rock and Roll High School, I Want to Be Sedated. And of course, Billy Idol was a part of that second British invasion who went mainstream. That took place in the 80s, along with Def Leppard, Adamant, Madness, The Police, The Eurythmics. Music was churning in the 80s, and Billy Idol struck at the right time. Yes, like Green Day, he received backlash from the punk rock community, not as egregious, but he kept his rebellious attitude and all the aesthetics associated with punk, and he kept them attached to his act. Then he did Eyes Without a Face and everything fucked up. Now, where do you guys stand with Eyes Without a Face?
That is a great fucking song.
Do you like that song? Is that like a lovemaking song?
It's like a lovemaking. It's you know it's like what everybody's doing.
It's a good song.
Everybody put out the ballad song that they have to show their sensitive side so they can get some. They can they that's what it was, dude. That's what it was. It's a lovemaking song.
That is more
like Every Rose Has Its Thorn, but Billy Idol's version.
Infusing that like the punk roots with, quote unquote 80s pop, because he was a popular 80s musician. His music, you could dance to it. That's the ballad, right? That's the love ballad of the 80s, Eyes Without a Face. That's kind of what it sounds like. You'd think if you never knew it was Billy Idol, you might say it's something, it's somebody else.
Very
you can
different.
compare it to, you might think it's some other big Depeche Mode or some shit, something like that. So I think every musician has to have a ballad. Definitely in the 80s, there was plenty of them. So I don't think it's a good song. I don't think it's a bad song. It's just different.
He has that rock part like towards the end or towards the middle, but great song. I remember Billy Idol. I think his first video was White Wedding. I might be wrong about that, but that was the first time I saw him. And in the video for White Wedding, he looks at the camera like, this is who the fuck I am. You're going to remember this. You're going to remember the spiked peroxide dyed hair, my snarl. Yep. I'm a good looking guy. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to dominate this era. So he had all the confidence of anybody in this era. And that's why I think Billy Idol was so well liked and everybody loved him. And I think the difference between the evolution of Billy Idol and like the evolution of, say, Green Day, as I mentioned, was Green Day made it happen and it was just happening for Billy Idol. I don't think anything was forced. That's probably why his sustainability as a top act didn't last very long, because Billy was kind of just rolling with the tide. He was just saying, okay, this is an incredible, loud era. I'm a loud musician. I have the aesthetics that a lot of people are incorporating into what they like to listen to, because they didn't see a lot of punk rock acts in the mainstream. And Billy Idol sort of crossed that path. Also, shout outs to Steve Stevens, his guitarist. Bob and I are going to talk about two incredible guitarists for the bands we selected, but Billy Idol had an amazing guitarist in Steve Stevens, very underrated. Billy went from this straight punk rock style into like this new wave mainstream, and he did that effortlessly. What I liked about Billy, he wasn't this marketing monster like so many other bands tried to be. He had his look, he had his snarl, as I mentioned before, the spiked peroxide hair, blonde hair, his sound, and that was good enough for him. And I know these bands, that have these front leads, they were all very ephemeral. They all had a very ephemeral time at their peak, but Billy seemed to just arrive and leave so quickly. And I wish Billy had stuck around for a while. I know he had a little bit of success in the 90s with the Ford Fairlane song Rock the Cradle of Love. Then he grew out his hair, but he was so good at blending rock and punk and pop. So what happened? All the lonely teenage misfits who sat in the dark rooms masturbating and listening to shoplifted music all grew up and they all got jobs. And I think they stopped listening to Billy Idol. The early 80s were a perfect time to turn rebellion into dollar signs. And he saw that. Billy rode with the times. This was both beneficial and detrimental. Beneficial in that he popularized a look that was underground and he popularized it into the mainstream. Detrimental in that times changed, but Billy didn't. And we joked about how he still has the same hairstyle. We saw him in The Wedding Singer. He had a funny scene. We loved him for that. He had a horrible motorcycle accident and drug overdose. He signed some bad recording contracts and Billy just faded away. He was a hazard to both himself and a prisoner of time. Therefore, I cannot call him the best, but I do have a lot of great memories listening to Billy Idol, especially in the early to mid 80s where he was on top of the world. What do you think, Bob?
No one talks to Billy Idol that way. What the fuck? Billy Idol, man. Talk about, I think he definitely fits that mold of what an 80s frontman should be, or an 80s icon should be. I mean, when you think of 80s rock music, his name or his face should be one of the first things that pops into your head. Pop punk, commercially successful sound that he created. I mean, he rode that wave. He definitely did, Rand, that you mentioned that he was this punk, he was this rebel, but he also knew how to fit his music to fit the popular music that was going on in the times. And he did it in such a great way to where like the hard rockers still loved him. Some punk rockers, like, old school 70s punk rock may have resented him a bit, but He gained a shitload of new fans, and I think he still had a great following from his original fans, from his original bands like Generation X. I'm sorry, stumbling over my words. I mean, he had the look, he had the sound, he had the presence, he had the hair, the confidence, that I don't give a fuck punk attitude, but I'm going to sing a song that maybe your mom will listen to as she drops you off at school. So it kind of had a cool vibe to it, man. But like, he was punk, but he was also like the kind of punk that you'd probably bring home to your dad and introduce him to, because he was like somebody you'd want to drink, somebody I know I'd want to drink beer with, hang out with. Like, he looked dangerous, but he also, you know, he had a heart of gold, that type of shit. You know what I mean? Y'all know what I'm getting at? Like, he had,
He was approachable.
He was very approachable. And what's crazy is he was very, very different, bringing that punk sound to the 80s. But he was also very, very similar to the 80s artist sound that was going on, that was very popular at the time, kind of like what Cyndi Lauper did, how she was so different, and with the red hair and you know, the different look, but she sang so perfectly, and her sound fit like that 80s mold, and like 80s, you know, the romance movies. Like, it just fit. I think Billy Idol fit into that category as well. Like, he was punk, but he was also so commercial. And I think, as it was, why he didn't last as long, it was, you know, including the drugs and, you know, the bad contracts, like you mentioned, Rand. The 90s came along, and grunge came around, the late 80s and early 90s, and they completely changed everything, the way music sound. Yeah. And you can't be a punk rocker that's also very approachable and also very commercial, and then hit the grunge era and be like, I can be dark now. I don't think you could. I don't think you could go back to that. I don't think, you know, Eyes Without a Face is probably his darkest song, and that's doesn't really fit the grunge mold. So I think the changing of the guard in that grunge era that comes into play in the late 80s, early 90s, I don't think he could jump into that. I don't think he could ever fit into that. I don't think he could fit that box or even sound alternative. I think he could just be 80s. I think he could just be Billy Idol.
You know, the 90s punk scene was, you know, there was a resurgence there with you know, you mentioned Green Day, but there was like other bands like that weren't commercial. Like, you know, the whole, you know, I know there's the movie, go watch the movie, SLC Punk, and you'll see like that form of hardcore Great punk was
shout out to Matt Lillard,
was coming back, and he would have never fit into that. You know, they probably wouldn't have accepted him, because he was, you know, it was, you know, dance punk, new wave punk, whatever you want to call it. I know he released music in the 90s, but it's different. It's like Bob said, and like you said too as well, Rand. I mean, it's different. He had his time in the spotlight, and it was great. And I always loved. He kind of always just seemed like he was him, and that's it. Like, yeah, that's great. That's cool
for sure. And like you said, I like how you mentioned that 90s had the rock. I mean, the punk rock resurgence. Green Day, their first album, like you're talking about Dookie, there was it was a depressing punk rock album. Like, the lyrics weren't like fun and commercial, and you know, it was kind of down, and you know, a lot of grunge lyrics are very, I would say, dark, you know what I mean, not as 80s friendly and poppy and commercial and let's dance. They're very dark and sitting alone in a room, that type of shit, you know what I mean? And I think Green Day's punk would fit that mold, especially with their first album, Dookie. I don't think Billy Idol could make music like that, or I don't think he'd be believable in making music like that, even though he lived that crazy rock lifestyle there in the 80s. Now, having said all that, in the 80s, again, he was just amazing and on top of the world, and him being your pick as the best frontman is a very, very good pick, man. It's hard to argue against him, because he was kind of on top of the mountain there for a while.
To close this up, I want to ask you guys something, because we talk a lot of similarities about these punk bands who become mainstream, and their fans who are with them, like, I knew the band before everybody knew the band, has this resentfulness. Does that make sense? I mean, isn't the point of rock music to become the biggest star in the world and to make as much money and to live in the lavish lifestyle that you desired when you decided to make this your occupation?
Yeah, fuck yeah. And then people also grow up, people get married, people have kids, people have lives, people want to take care of their families and be able to retire and become a fucking adult. You know what I mean? Like, there's a real adult problems. You have kids, you have lives, your parents get older. You want to take care of people. You want to, hey, fuck it. If I have to sing every rose has a thorn in Spanish in Mexico City. Fuck it, they're gonna pay me $1 million. I'm in. You know what I mean? Like, they're gonna evolve, and yeah, the younger people are gonna be like, yeah, you sold out, and yeah, your music changed. If people are still, they're still selling millions and millions of copies, and gold records, platinum records, whatever the fuck the case is, they're successful, man. You're not paying for their kids' meals or their kids' private school or their kids' Corvette. You know what I mean? They have to pay for that shit themselves. Goddamn it.
I think when fans who are like true punk rock fans who are punk and they have a certain aesthetic and they see guys who look like they have shirt collars, backwards caps in the audience, they start getting resentful. I'm like, you should be happy that the band that you followed is now built this mass appeal. That's just me. But Joseph, do you agree with that, or do you think that fans should have a certain ownership when they knew the band when?
I don't like when.
Do you get mad? I like the Deftones, but I tuck in my shirt. Do you get mad at this?
You would tuck in
the very top button, motherfucker.
No.
Loosen up.
No. I don't like when we're going off topic here, but
sure. But it's a funny. I'm just curious. I could cut some of this out.
I do like when bands that I like find new audiences. Where I draw the line on that is when you fuck with it, like appreciate it, enjoy the music. Don't try to reverb it, slow it down. We see a lot of this on TikTok. No, we're not on TikTok. Well,
delete the app.
The pod is on TikTok, but these videos end up getting on our Instagram feed and the reels, and you see like stupid videos of people trying to be trendy with a slowed down like you're using the song in a different context too, and that's the part I don't like when you're taking what is already a great thing and you claim to be a fan, but then you're like,
it's musical expression, Joseph.
But you're trying to claim ownership. Like you're just like this is my video.
Mine.
I did it. This is my video, and I made the song fit differently to the video. No, leave the song alone. Like that's cool. Enjoy the song. Enjoy the music. Enjoy those great bands that we all like. Go back and check out their catalog, but leave the music alone. Like you don't need to do that. That's just my opinion.
Good point.
I don't care about shirts. I wear whatever the fuck I want. I wear shirts from all kinds of people. I don't care when people with new celebrities that wear like shirts. It's like that's cool. It's actually funny to me because you see like celebrities wearing heavy metal band shirts and they really never heard any of the lyrics.
Name 4 songs.
No, they probably would never wear them if they actually listened to the lyrics of songs. But anyway, here and there.
So I'm up next with my selection, and I selected Axl Rose as best frontman of the 80s, Guns N' Roses. In 1987, Guns N' Roses took the rock world by storm, led by William Bruce Rose Jr., who we all know as Axl Rose. I could see the smoke coming out of Joseph's ears already because he hates this guy. Guns N' Roses, a band that came together when local LA, California bands Hollywood Rose and LA Guns merged. Axl, yes, he's controversial, he's erratic, but you cannot deny his icon status. And here's something important to note. Axl possesses a 5-octave vocal range. He can hit both high and low notes as well as he could hit his audience members that fuck with him. So that's Whitney Houston range. At his apex, he is pitch perfect. Now he doesn't have that vocal range anymore, but we're talking specifically about the 80s. Don't sleep on his ability to actually sing just because he screams a lot and he yells a lot. Case in point, Patience. He displays his vast array of vocal talents on that song. He goes low, he goes high, he whistles, he sleeps with beautiful women. He's wild, he's sensitive. What a role model. Other than the horrible things he said and wore, I think Axl Rose epitomized what the 80s frontman should look like, act like, and sound like. He ran amok. He had this chaotic presence that could not be ignored. In his prime, and I'm talking about 1987 to 1993, he was unmatched. He led us from that weird sort of end of the 80s to the beginning of the 90s where society and culture and the zeitgeist didn't quite know what to latch onto until, of course, grunge came in. Guns N' Roses, along with some other bands, helped usher the rock culture into that weird sort of 2 or 3 years. He treated himself poorly. That's why he looks like Shirley MacLaine in Steel Magnolias. See, I kept it in the Flower family. I know he was controversial. The things he said, the things he did. He put a song written by Charles Manson on a major label album when everyone else advised against it. It wasn't Sweet Child of Mine, so relax, everybody. You can still sing along to it. Rock stars shouldn't be our moral compass. Well, maybe Scott Stapp, when he was singing about spiritual enlightenment, but Rockstar should not be your moral compass. Appetite for Destruction is about as flawless as you can get for a debut album. And we're going to talk debut album somewhere down the line, but it is a flawless album. For me, Axl personified rock. He caused controversy. He stayed true to his convictions. He was still a sort of mystery despite being everywhere. Yes, his antics and unpredictable behavior got out of hand. I don't condone that. When rock was pivoting to glam and teased hair, there were a few popular bands that kept down the fort. And like I mentioned, Guns N' Roses were one of those bands. Shout outs to Metallica as well, and Pantera as well. And yes, he was an egomaniac. But my final point, yes, he broke up the band. I'm going to sound like a hypocrite because I'm going to make this point about another selection later, but he was more than just a contributor. His frontman presence controlled where the band went. He had talent, he had power, he can write, he could sing, and he made people feel his music. And that, my friends, is why I think Axl Rose is the best frontman of the 80s. What do you guys think?
Wrong. No, I'm just kidding. Like, what's it called?
Blazing Saddles.
Blazing Saddles, yeah. No, I think this is a great pick. Now, here is I do have an argument against it. And it's Appetite for Destruction. There is no doubt in my mind that this is one of the best albums of the 80s. This is an amazing debut album for Guns N' Roses. The music, the songs, the hits. I mean, oh my fucking God. Night Train, Welcome to the Jungle, Paradise City, Mr. Brownstone, Sweet Child of Mine. Like, they had a lot of great hits. The only problem I have with it is the best 80s frontman. And although they had an amazing opening album, their second album, they only had two in the 80s, second album, Lies, I don't really think it hit as well as the first one, man. I mean, the best song off that album, it is Patience, but Used to Love Her, Okay, You're Crazy, Move to the City, Mama Can't, like none of these songs really, it's hard to follow up. No, let's say this. It's hard to follow up Appetite for Destruction. Really, it really is. But when we're talking about best frontman of the 80s, I think there has to be some kind of longevity. At least, at least like a good period of time where this guy dominated or this band dominated. And, Appetite for Destruction was such a great album, but it was kind of like, I don't want to say one hit wonder of the 80s only, but that album is what really set them apart. But their second album kind of flopped a little bit, and I think that may hold him back. Axl Rose was, a bit out there. He did hit a lot of things: heroin, drugs, Botox. He didn't have the patience to, just let himself age, gracefully. So Patience is bullshit, that song. I think that I think he's a great frontman. I've had this argument before, and I brought this up, and I've talked about it with multiple people. I've always thought of Guns N' Roses as a 90s band. It's very weird. I know Appetite for Destruction is their biggest album, and it came out in 87. And I don't know why. I've always...
Maybe The Illusion? You had Illusion 1 and 2?
Yeah. I mean, they did put out good albums and good music in the 90s. Axl Rose, like when you think of... And this has nothing to do, and I know this is, this is not much of an argument, but when you think of like 80s lead singer and 80s frontman, you think spandex, you think the makeup, you think of the teased hair, you think of stuff like that. And Axl Rose doesn't quite fit that mold. You know what I mean? He definitely looks more like, if I could say, like a alternative grunge rocker of the 90s. I think he fits more that category as far as his look is concerned. Not exactly the best argument, but I'm just saying he suits more the 90s for me as far as his looks concerned. Great singer. He's out there. He's crazy. He definitely takes that band to another level. The musical sound of the guitars and that band. I mean, they had two guitarists, a bassist, a drummer that were fucking phenomenal, and they had a great band behind him. And for his voice to like still be able to outshine or at least stand out with that music behind him, it says a lot about him. He's a really great lead singer.
This is yeah.
Painful.
Okay.
Say it, Joseph.
No.
He hates him.
I don't hate him. He's definitely not one of my favorites.
Joseph couldn't get his hair that straight. That's what it is.
Musicians' voices. I understand, and Randy mentioned the range. That's cool. That's I can't do that shit. So that's cool. Like I'm not.
You don't wear leather pants that tight, Joseph. I guarantee you.
I'm not gonna try. I think that band is a fantastic band. That band wouldn't have succeeded if they didn't have Axl Rose singing those songs. I don't think so, because we kind of heard something similar, just even if it was just two members later on with the Velvet Revolver. I mean,
But that was a super group. Though.
I understand.
You had
I
guys
understand.
from Wasted
I
Youth
understand.
on there.
Super
Yeah.
duper.
But you had two
Stone
of the
Temple
heavy
Pilots.
hitters.
Yeah.
Two of the heavy hitters from this band. I understand the selection. I understand why people talk about him. I understand why he's on list. I actually saw a couple of publications that put this guy in top 5. I didn't even think I saw one as number 1. Hey, that's cool. That's your preference. That's your thing. I too look more at Guns N' Roses as the 90s, because I think that they were, and although Appetite for Destruction, like Bob said, was or like it's been mentioned, was released in 87. Lies was, it did good, but it was controversial. There was a song on it that was very controversial. Appetite for Destruction was actually, the band was still releasing singles. Paradise City was released as a single in 89. This album came out in 87. So we're 89. It's January of 89, but we're 1 year away from the 90s. Night Train was released July 25th, 1989. That's where we're getting that's where I hope people can understand why Bob and I would think, like, we think more of Guns N' Roses as a 90s band, but I understand it. And it just like,
They milked the shit out of that album.
Yeah,
they really
like our
did.
second album kind of sucks. Paradise City, fuck it, re-release it. July.
Keep it going.
Fuck patience.
But they did have success with Use Your Illusion 1 and Use Your Illusion 2. So there's that's good.
Yeah,
that kind of
sure.
adds to the fact of, there were also a great 90s band. Axl Rose himself, a larger than life character. I get it. He was the first video that we see from them, was it Welcome to the Jungle? Is that the first music video?
Yes.
And what is, I know Bob said that he doesn't look too 80s, but he is kind of dressed in some scenes looking very close to 80s.
That was intentional, Joseph. That was him making fun of the style at the time. He has makeup and teased hair, and he's wearing spandex. He's making fun of the bands that were hot at the time.
Yeah. So he's different. He was completely different. Yeah.
So good on him for that, and stage presence. He had a voice that people liked, that people thought was good. He was controversial. He was charismatic. He kind of knew what he was doing.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Unfortunately, you mentioned some things about, like, he was also the downfall of the band.
I agree.
That, we can't say that didn't happen for a lot of these bands that we mentioned in honorable mention. We can't say that, like, oh no, well, he can't. None of these people can't be the best frontman because they destroyed their band. Hey, it happens.
What's Bruce Springsteen gonna do? Bruce Springsteen took the last bagel. Fuck that guy.
Fuck that guy. I'm not gonna clap for him in the background.
This is the 80s. If you made it through the 80s without having with your band, not going down in flames because of internal conflicts, then good for you. I understand. Like I said, he's on the list. I do kind of see him more as the 90s because they had a good career in the 90s, longer. And I think he was more crazier in the 90s, right? Am I?
He's definitely crazier. Yeah. That's when the money started rolling in. So yeah.
And the cocaine.
So I think he became more larger than life in the 90s, but it doesn't take away from obviously the first album and their presence in the 80s. Towards the back end of the decade, but still, it is what it is, and that was a good album musically. I do like a lot of those songs. The musically, Axl Rose isn't a terrible singer. It's maybe more the squeals that I don't like, or the high pitched thing. They're not squeals. That's the wrong term for it. But his high pitched vocals, I think his lower, more
November Rain.
It's better. It's better. He sings that a lot better. But yeah, this is definitely a great pick. I mean, it's going to be talked about. It's definitely mentioned in something like this.
Let me guess. I bet both of you appreciate the vocals on "Don't Cry."
Yeah.
All right. Good. He's great on that song, right?
Patience too.
Patience.
Yeah. Don't Cry is really good. Yeah.
Just making sure, because I feel like both of you appreciate more when he was, like, not over the top. He was
playing
more
the piano too. Yeah. I think he did a really good job playing the piano and singing. That'd be on the serious note. He really did.
I'll share this one quick story, and I think I might have shared it here before. I had a boss who was very into rock music, and he went to go watch The Cult Guns N' Roses opened for the Cult. Nobody knew who the hell Guns N' Roses were, and people booed them off the stage. And Ian Astbury, when he came on, lead singer from the Cult, got on the microphone and said, "You guys are going to regret booing that band because they're going to be the biggest band in the world in a couple of years." And for a time period, they were. So, I mean, Guns N' Roses was a tremendous band on top of the world at one point, but so goes the story, right? Drugs, alcohol, egos. It just ruins a band. And same thing happened to Guns N' Roses. And you listen to him now, he's not the same Axl Rose. Obviously, he's a lot older. He sits down for the concerts now.
And you know what? That's obviously, you know, you get older, it's gonna, with a guy who sang with a voice like his, who would hit those notes, hit those highs, and if you don't take care of yourself, you know, obviously your voice is not going to be the same at this point in your life. I think it's cool. I think for fans from the beginning, they get a chance to go see this band to this day. I'd say it's definitely a better show than going to go see Motley Crue.
And then
you'd rather go see a reunited, and they appear to be in good terms with each other. That's great.
Yeah,
that in the end, that's all you can ask for, is that, hey, they're friendly with each other now. They're still touring, doing some shows, and that's cool. People get a chance to go relive those moments.
I think they're on good terms with their alimony and child support payments, so they got to go out there and make some money.
They're like, hey, we all need money. We all have payments. Let's go, man. Just another one tour, Tokyo.
Speaking of a musician or a frontman whose voice kind of got lost after a few decades, Bob, who do you got for us?
Okay, hold on. There is only one man that could outshine one of the greatest guitarists of all time, and that man is Diamond David Lee Roth, the lead singer, the frontman, the show for possibly the greatest band of the decade, of the 80s, Van Halen. Not Van Hagar, Rand. Van Halen.
I think you read my notes, but go ahead.
You talk about appetite for destruction. Van Halen came off one of the most monumental starts of any rock band's career in 1978 and 1979. They had hits like Running with the Devil, Eruption, Janie's Crying, Dance the Night Away. They ushered in this new decade of rock in the late 70s, early 80s. They had this young, amazing, one of a fucking kind guitarist and Eddie Van Halen, who is one of my favorite guitarists of all time. And then they also had this one dude, Diamond David Lee Roth, whose acrobatics and showmanship, man, they just blew the world away. When you have that kind of combination of guitarist and lead singer or frontman, you know, they were unstoppable, and they ushered in this brand new decade of rock and roll in the early 80s, and they really did take the world by storm, man. They released 4 albums in the 80s, 4 under David Lee Roth and Van Halen, 1984 being probably the best. I wouldn't say it rivals Appetite for Destruction as the best album of the decade, Rand. They had Jump, Panama, Drop Dead Legs, Hot for Teacher, I'll Wait, hit after hit after hit. And not only did their albums kill it, but their concerts were fucking epic. You want to talk about a frontman? A frontman steals the show during a concert. And what happens when you mix Jack Daniels and cocaine and spandex? You get Diamond fucking David Lee Roth, baby, who could put on a show like no other, man. He was the fucking show. And now imagine, I want folks to imagine, you're in the 80s and you're partying and you go to the concert and you're just mesmerized by this sound of this guitarist just erupting, Eddie Van Halen jamming. And all of a sudden, this one dude drop kicks his way to center stage and starts dancing and singing and putting on the fucking show. How do you distract people? And distract is not the word I'm looking for, but how do you change the view of people who are watching just this amazing Eddie Van Halen? And anybody who loves rock and roll and loves guitar knows Eddie Van Halen is the man, one of the greatest of all time. But David Lee Roth was Van Halen at one point. I mean, he was the band. He was the show live and in person and in music videos. The sound was Eddie Van Halen, but the fucking look, who you're attracted to, who you paid attention to was David Lee Roth. The fucker could entertain like nobody's business. Every dude in the 80s wanted to party with him. Every woman wanted to sleep with him. The bastard fucking had it all. He really did. He had it all. And a frontman, guys, it has to be just more than a singer, like we talked about. He has to be able to sing. He has to be able to move. He has to be able to entertain. He has to be able to set the bar. And this guy set the bar. He closed down a lot of fucking bars too. But he set the bar as far as 80s frontmen are concerned. And like we talked about Billy Idol, when you think of 80s rock and roll and you think about frontmen, David Lee Roth is right there. He's one of the first names that comes up. Van Halen is one of the first rock bands of the 80s that pops into your mind. I know there was a lot of difficulties with the band. I know they broke up after 84 and he kind of went his own solo career, but I was listening to a lot of his solo albums, especially the first one. Man, the sound stayed the same. The guitar stayed the same. I know Van Halen wasn't playing behind him, but the sound was very much his sound. When he left Van Halen and they brought in Sammy Hagar, Van Halen's sound definitely changed. I know it add more synthesizer. It was definitely different. Kind of fit more of the times. But if you listen to David Lee Roth's solo albums after he left the band, they were very similar to 1984, and a lot of their great albums from the 80s. So, as unpopular an opinion as it might be, because of how great Eddie Van Halen is, I think David Lee Roth was a big part of their success. And I don't think they had as much, you could say what you say, oh man, they sold shitload of albums after he left. Yeah, man, but he was the show. He was the man. He's what I think of when I think of 80s rock and roll lead singer. So that's my take on him, guys. I know Rand has notes. I know he's going to mention Sammy Hagar for some reason.
I will. Yes. Let it be known that I'm pro Van Halen more so than Van Hagar. So I just want to get that known right now.
He's lying, folks. He's lying. His fingers crossed.
Van Halen formed in 1973, released their first album of a self-titled debut that you mentioned, Bob, in 1978, and the sky was the absolute limit. They opened up for Black Sabbath early in their career, and they blew them off the stage, according to audience members. Ozzy Osbourne was sitting there, who the fuck are these guys? Because these guys were incredible. They had arguably the best guitarist on the planet. His brother, an underrated and technical proficient and rhythmically precise drummer, and a bass player who had a voice of an angel. Let's get it right. Then we had someone who, if in the late 70s and early 80s, you could grab a PlayStation 5 controller and create the ultimate frontman, the looks, the movement, the stage presence, and the charisma, you would have David Lee Roth. I have to admit that. And yes, Van Halen could have made it without him. It wouldn't have been as much fun. And they did make it without him. Wasn't as much fun, but they could have. It would have been a tougher road, but in Van Halen up until 1985, you had three extremely talented musicians, and you had David Lee Roth, a showman, a ringleader, the bad boy. All the intangibles of a backstage lust and rock god valor. Nobody lived the frontman life bigger than him. Maybe Mick Jagger. He's up there, right? If you saw David Lee Roth just once, I promise you, you would not forget who he was. In interviews, he was this silver-tongued devil that cut promos like a professional wrestler. He moved like an action hero on stage with his karate kicks and flips. He was loud, flamboyant, and silly. That vision I always remember of him wearing the sunglasses and the cowboy hat, riding an inflatable microphone on stage. I mean, classic stuff. He wrote the Webster's Dictionary entry on what having fun and being famous was supposed to be at the time. David Lee Roth came from a well-to-do family. His father was an ophthalmologist. His mother was a teacher. He grew up very hyper, so hyper that his parents arranged for him to receive treatment with a psychiatrist. Little did they know that that would be essentially what made him famous. He had money, so he cheaply rent speaker systems to a band called Mammoth, which we now know became Van Halen. By the way, Diamond Dave said it was his idea to name the band Van Halen. Great marketing, smart guy, if it's true, right? I believe he had a few failed auditions with the band until they finally let him on board. I'm sure it was because he was the only guy in the band with money. There was a whole interesting story on how Van Halen got started, the parties, the clubs. Gene Simmons is involved. It's a great read if you have the time. Look up their history, because one of the best histories of any bands of all time. 3 reasons as to why I cannot call him the best frontman of the 80s. And I love David Lee Roth. David Lee Roth can scream, but he couldn't sing. I think that's an important criteria. Of course, he had the benefit of tremendous studio backing and arguably the best backing band in the world, including an amazing backup singer who could masquerade that. This also positions him as a sort of fringe player of the band, and we'll talk more about his replacement soon. Bobby already talked about him a little bit, and he refused to evolve. Van Halen's previous 2 80s albums before 1984 were successful, but they also struggled out of the gate. Their representation were paying radio stations, and we all know about payola, to play their singles, which eventually salvaged record sales and kept the band relevant. So they were struggling by the time 1984 came out, their biggest album, but this proved to elevate a heavy concern. Eddie saw bands like Duran Duran, The Cars, and bands who implemented more of a modern cis sound selling records and having sold out shows. Paranoid, he wanted the band's sound to evolve into something more modern. Whatever Eddie says goes for Alex. David Lee Roth's argument was that no girl wants to fuck a guy behind a keyboard. Poor Michael Anthony. What a rock star thing.
There's a point, goddammit.
Poor Michael Anthony was completely neutral. He was Switzerland. He was this short guy who looked like he should be working at a Toyota dealership. It was just a mess. Now, we're talking 80s, and in 1984, Van Halen's last album with David Lee Roth in the lineup was released. We all love The Hard Rock of Panama, Hot for Teacher, both singles that charted modestly. Songs like Top Jimmy, Girls Gone Bad, House of Pain, and Drop Dead Legs. Great rock songs that weren't released as singles. What were the two highest charting songs of that album? The synth-heavy Jump and All Wait, with Jump being number one as a single and All Wait hitting the top 12. This proved that the Van Halen brothers to be right, or at least temporarily. And there's more to the breakup. David Lee Roth used drugs to party, disagreements, infighting. There were homemade sex tapes. Van Halen's security had a tough time keeping David Lee Roth in control. He was breaking fire code laws in stadiums. David Lee Roth was so out of control, but he wanted to be a rock star, and the rest of Van Halen wanted to be accomplished musicians. Van Halen went on to be successful with another lead singer, Sammy Hagar, who was already established. And of course, there's a great story on how him and Eddie Van Halen met. I encourage everybody to read about that. David Lee Roth had
in a men's room.
Car dealership, but okay. David Lee Roth had some modest rock hits, as you mentioned, Bob. Living in Paradise, Yankee Rose. He had that Just a Gigolo cover, but ultimately the Van Halen brothers won, and we all lost, including David Lee Roth. How can we say he's the best frontman of the 80s if he caused the breakup of the biggest rock band, of one of the biggest rock bands of all time? And that's my point. And Bob, I'm going to say this. Everything you said was spot on. I love David Lee Roth, but the fact that this culminated into just a massive breakup, I have issues with that. What do you think, Joseph?
I think you just answered your own question with your own selection.
With your own band. That's what the same shit with
But wait a minute, there's a difference. I knew you were going to say that. That was a super band formed from three different bands. Van Hagar was just Sammy Hagar coming in.
He also didn't mention that Van Halen had like 4 different lead singers, because apparently the band can't get along with anybody.
We won't count Gary Sharon, okay?
Yeah, no, we have to count everybody that they brought in. So we're saying like David Lee Roth did it, and then Van Halen had like 4 or 5 different lead singers. Give me a break.
Joseph.
Nerds.
We're
I just want to be a musician.
Look, okay, so David Lee Roth, okay, yeah, like Bob mentioned in the beginning, he was the singer. They were just putting out good music. David Lee Roth was who he was at the time. I don't think it was anything too crazy. They were doing good. They were having fun. They were making great music and selling a lot of records and making money. I guess maybe that, kind of got to him. And who wouldn't, I guess it depends on, I can't say I would. I know I like to say like, oh, if I had suddenly woke up and I was a gajillionaire, would I be the same person? And I think I would, but you just never know.
There'd be signs.
There'd be signs. Right? Those are some of the best things ever. I wouldn't tell anybody, but there'd be signs. You could like buy like a
he owns a Taco Bell or some shit like that. Driving the Weenie Mobile.
Things like that. But yeah, like to Bob's credit, like we talk about, and we ain't talking about love, but we ain't talking about Eddie Van Halen is a legend. He will always will be, and nobody will take that away from him. The influence that he had on thousands, if not millions, of guitarists for a lot of people that I listen to. Nobody can take that away from him. But at the time, let's go back to the beginning. Did anybody know he was going to be Eddie Van Halen? I know the band is named Van Halen. There's 2 members of the band with the same last name, so sure, why not? I don't think anybody went into this like thinking like Van Halen was going to be Van Halen. Eddie Van Halen was going to be Eddie Van Halen. Nobody knew what was going to happen. It just so turns out that he was that fucking good. And it so turns out that David Lee Roth was a really good fucking singer, and he was a really good performer and a showman. And I think everything, and it could add the drugs, add the money, and of course it goes to his head. He starts to think differently, and I can kind of understand, maybe feeling outnumbered or
outnumbered.
Like you don't have any
Ostracized,
say because he was the last member to join that
iteration.
Iteration.
Mm-hmm.
I was gonna say, I was like, no, not incarnation. That's weird. That's the kind of same thing.
The same thing. Yeah.
But,
condensation.
But obviously,
masturbation,
affiliation,
education,
the Hilltone. Okay, go ahead.
Obviously, it's gonna be in most arguments, it's probably gonna be 3 against 1 all the time. So I understand, like, maybe the frustration, but he also was kind of starting to, like Bob said, he was starting to, looked at him. He was a performer. He was I don't want to call him a clown, but he was a ringleader.
Dr. Roxo, the rock and roll clown.
Yeah, Dr. Roxo is a great show, Metalocalypse. The character named Dr. Roxo is a play on, it's based off of David Lee Roth.
I can see that.
You threw me off of that. I had something.
Yeah, like but people started to look more at David Lee Roth.
Yes. Like I was calling him a ringleader, and you kind of see that in some of the videos. I forgot what video it is. He's dressed like a circus ringleader. I think I remember that. Maybe it was.
He did that in a lot of shit. I like in Hot for Teacher. I mean, he definitely stands out. The other guys are just like smiling and playing the guitars, and he's like, of course, David Lee Roth over the fucking top as usual.
The only guy that could
that's
dance,
that's what got people in the stands to see them too. And
I don't blame him for that. He's doing his
what a lead
part.
singer's
He
supposed
wants
to do.
Yes, he wants to succeed. He wants the band to succeed. I get it, but did it also kind of go to his head at some point where he was like, and I don't know about it at the time. I know that from what we all read, there's a lot of stories, but what's printed is and I think Rand mentioned it too, musical direction, what songs are releasing, how fast they're moving, the pace of releases and recording came into play, and that's supposedly a reason for David Lee Roth leaving the band. That's fine. It could be other things too, but yes, I do believe he was just as on par as the greatness of Eddie Van Halen, and sure, they succeeded. There's a big difference between, like, okay, I don't, people will lose their mind over this. There's nothing wrong with Van Hagar. Like, there's nothing wrong with that music.
Oh, there's plenty.
No, there's not. No, there's good. I'm saying there's good songs. He's different though. Sammy Hagar was different. He wasn't Dave, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But that's where people.
I think he fit the personality too of the band. Like they're all like, hey, they're happy to perform, but they're not performers. They're musicians. They just want to play their instrument and sing their song, and they want people to love them. I think Sammy Hagar was the same. Like Sammy Hagar was never dancing around the stage and having stage presence and putting on a show. He was just like singing the song. Yeah.
But then, that's the
so they kicked him out and got another lead singer.
Yeah, no, that's the contrast though between these two guys. They've talked to him, and David, and it's nice to see David Lee Roth say great things about Van Halen.
Yeah.
Nowadays, they interviewed him. He said seeing the band's songs with Eddie Van Halen was better than any love affair I ever had. So he's, I mean, of course, like, right? You let all that shit
get
go.
older and all
the benefit of hindsight always come into play. I look at the big songs with Sammy Hagar right now, Dreams, Love Comes Walking In, How Do I Know When It's Love. David Lee Roth couldn't sing any of those songs. Maybe Pound Cake. I think he could do Pound Cake.
But they're also like slowed down and like soft, and like David Lee Roth would be like, how the fuck am I gonna throw a jump kick to this shit? Hey, there's no tomorrow. I think he could sing that one. Right now. Hey.
I don't know if it was resentment. Look, let me just to kind of close, because I do want to talk about this, but I want to close up my point on him, or my rebuttal to Bob. Look, this guy was awesome. Look, David Lee Roth is probably he's definitely up there. I put him up there in top 5. He was a showman. He had a good voice. He had a great voice.
I don't know if
he was a performer.
Yeah.
I think
he had certain notes.
Have you heard Dance? Have you heard Dance the Night Away? He can't sing.
I mean, like, you say that, but I also hear Axl Rose screeching. I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Joseph, finish. We keep
No. I'm just saying, like, energy that David Lee Roth put into every performance, him doing his part, and I talked about it earlier, him going all out to do what he can for this band to succeed, all while probably the greatest guitar player ever is also in the band. It speaks volumes to him, and he's definitely was a presence. He's everything that we mentioned as far as characteristics, this guy had it, maybe plus 2.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah,
So he was really great. But I wanted to close that off because I kind of still wanted to talk about this in this whole thing, because we were getting into the breakup, and then maybe it was resentment. Maybe do you think he resented that the band was still successful after he left? Because I don't want to say, because some people will say, like, well, he started to eclipse Van Halen, and they didn't like that. So he was gone. He was gone from the band, and they won't succeed without him. They did succeed. And maybe that pissed him off, because we've heard of, obviously, the incident at the MTV Movie Awards, Video Music Awards in 96, their first reunion, the first time they were on stage together. And you see, like, if you go back and watch that video of them on stage, they look so like, and apparently they had arguments before they
look fractured for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Like it, and I don't know where that come from. I don't know if it was because, they were trying to do something, but Dave was like, I'm fucking Dave. Dave was really in the 90s.
How was he
Dave
supposed to change his personality? Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, I think the band was like, you should be humble now. See how successful we were with the 8 other lead singers that we had? See, you could, you should humble yourself and come hang out with us. And then David came out and he's like, I'm David. I'm going to fucking fuck around and have fun and talk shit and let's find some girls and do some drugs. Because that's what he was. That's who he is. You know what I mean?
I'm not faulting him for that. I don't think he started out to be that guy. I don't think that was ever his intention. But it is what it is.
They probably ganged up a lot on him, 3-1, the Van Halen brothers, and it happens, man.
I honestly think the decade had a lot to do with it. I think in the 70s they were a party band that were trying to find their footing. Once they had the taste of success, you had MTV come your way, you had all the media covering you, and now David Lee Roth is at the forefront because he's so charismatic. But I think all the other band members saw him as like, hey, you're just a part of the band. You're not even the best musician in the band. You're the 4th best musician.
Why are they taking pictures of you?
Yeah.
You're just the guy that sings the words that I write.
Yeah.
No, exactly. I'm not saying you didn't write songs.
But I mean, I think there was a lot of hostility and resentment that he was Van Halen when, in all actuality, all the guys who played the instruments were really Van Halen, and they're the ones that were carrying the band. But I mean, we saw some success.
I don't know. That's an argument to be had. I don't know if they carried him. I mean, for a while there, I think he was carrying the band as well, dude. He was the show. He was Van Halen there for a bit.
I mean, it's one of those cases.
I see both sides to that.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I mean, I'm pro David Lee Roth.
Let's look at the 80s real quick. The music video. Imagine having the music video, all those music videos without David Lee Roth in them. Would they be as entertaining?
No,
Would people
absolutely not.
Wasn't the first Van Halen video with Hagar Right Now, where they weren't even in the band?
Yeah. They're like, we can't put this motherfucker on camera.
Was that the first?
I don't think so. I think it was Dreams. I think it was Dreams.
Okay, well, it was just the airplane right now. They're not even in the video.
Yeah.
Fuck no. They're like, nobody wants to see Sammy Hagar.
Yeah, no,
I'm just kidding. I do like Sammy Hagar, but I'm saying, like, the 80s were a part of the music video was such a big part of the 80s in the music. Like, would they be as popular? Would Hot for Teacher be as great without David Lee Roth in that music video to make that song, to get people to go to the concerts and to buy their music? I think he was a big part of that, man.
Here's an argument for you, Bob. There's a lot of really great bands that we know from the 80s that maybe weren't as successful. Great bands, successful in their own right, but not like Van Halen successful, not, maybe Guns N' Roses successful or Billy Idol successful, who had great fucking musicians, but you don't really know anything about them, maybe because the singer didn't put on the show that, like, guys like Idol, David Lee Roth. I'm talking about David Lee Roth in this, but I'm not trying to. I don't want to, not include
say you love
our
him,
selections as well. I'm just saying, like it clearly, like, would Van Halen had succeeded? There is an argument to be had. Would Van Halen had succeeded with a different a different singer in the beginning of their career?
I don't think so. I think he brought too many
You
intangible.
don't think his guitar skills and would?
Oh yeah, I mean they would have succeeded.
They would have been. I mean, but there's a lot of guys in the '80s that could fucking jam on the guitar, Joseph. And I'm not. I know Eddie Van Halen's on a different level.
That's
Eddie
true.
Van Halen's on a different level. Yes,
a double
there's
tap
a lot
going,
of. Mm-hmm. Who is Randy?
I mean, I think
Randy
his
Rhoads,
innovation, his innovation alone would have like gotten attention, but I mean, it only added to the band's success when you're. I think David Lee Roth is a good singer, and I think he put on a show, and I think his vocals went on par with the music they were making, the guitar sounds that were coming out of Van Halen's guitar. I think they went hand in hand. I really do.
This reminds me of Airheads. Are you David Lee Roth or Van Halen? And they knew he was an undercover cop because he's a cop.
He's a cop. Give me another chance.
Whose side did you take? He's a cop.
Who would win a fight, Lemmy or God? Lemmy. Wrong. God. Wrong. Lemmy is God.
I know we're running a little long, guys. I think we're going to have to do a Van Halen episode at some point. We have so much more to talk about. I felt like we did.
There's so many lead singers to talk about, all 12 of them now. We're going to have to mention everybody.
Guys, 30 seconds. Final thoughts on 80s frontmen.
Definitely the beginning of charismatic people, like we mentioned.
Yes,
it's sure. I know we wouldn't have, like I said, I'm massive fan of Scott Weiland, and I know one of his major influences is Bowie.
Major.
He's a major. I was thinking about that when he said it. He's a major influence on me now, and I feel terrible. Anyway, yeah, dude, I definitely the start of something. I don't think we have characters like this today.
No.
I mean, there's good bands, but like they're all just known for being good bands. Collectively, exactly. And then of course the solo singers that do their thing. This kicked off a great time for frontmen and women, which we'll do that great episode too as well. Yes. Because of this decade of music.
Yeah, I agree 1,000,000%. This is where like 60s and 70s were a part of like where bands were just so amazing. The Zeppelins, the Pink Floyds, the Beatles, and then all of a sudden the 80s come around and it's about the frontman and the lead singer and the gimmick, the look, the show, the everything, everything else that goes along with the music became so popular in the 80s. And I think this is a great topic, a great mention, because this is like, pushed the lead singer into the forefront a lot, where in like the 70s, I don't feel we had that as much. In the 80s, it was huge. In the 90s, obviously, I mean, the frontman, we had some great grunge bands, but you always mention Kurt Cobain, and they always mention, the lead singer before of the great grunge band. So, I think this is the start of that.
I think for our generation, this era was essentially our introduction to what was cool and what stardom was. I grew up wanting to be a lead singer. I couldn't care less about the guitar, drums, bass, and keyboard. I wanted to be the guy with a microphone with the spandex pants and the ripped t-shirt. I wouldn't look so good in it now. It was the
at least for sleep.
At least for sleep. It was the embodiment of power and appeal. The drugs, the partying. There was no social media. There was no internet. They can live a life of fame and debauchery and this monoculture relatively unscathed, which is crazy because the 80s is where globalization of music really took shape, but they could do all this stuff. Had these guys been around for decades before, even decades later, things would have not been the same for them. And I think, Joseph and Bob, that's the point of, we don't see these type of frontmen anymore. Well, can they really do that anymore? Because everything is so ubiquitous now. Social media, cameras, cell phones everywhere. Nobody can live that lifestyle openly and be that kind of person with, cancel culture and the modernization of how we're supposed to behave. So it's very different now. So, I mean, great talk, guys. And we'll definitely have to do more talk about all these bands. I think these are all great selections.
Oh, okay.
That's our show, everyone. Listeners, we'd love to hear from you. Hit us up and let us know. Let us know who you think the best 80s frontman is. Most importantly, let us know what you think about the show. You may reach us at formidableopponents@gmail.com and follow us on all forms of social media by searching for Formidable Opponents. We want to thank Creative Little Pill for her great artwork. Please follow her on Instagram at Creative Little Pill. Please subscribe, rate, and review us on any podcast platform you're listening to us on. And join us next episode. We'll be back with best dance scene in a movie. So for Bob and Joseph, this is Randall. We'll see you next week.
Tonight's about me, guys.